So today I want to talk about my top 10 most anticipated science fiction books for 2025. I know it's a little ways out, but the titles are already starting to get announced. And I wanted to talk about it early here. I've already done a similar video for horror, so definitely go check that out. If you haven't already, I should have it linked down below or in the cards or wherever they live on YouTube these days. And so here I want to talk specifically about science fiction. While I love fantasy, I feel like there are a lot more anticipated lists focused on fantasy, so I wanted to give sci-fi some love, especially because it's a little bit harder to find those titles. And so I had to do a lot of research. I have some great books to talk about, or at least they sound great in premise, and that's the whole point of these videos, is to talk about the books with early buzz, and then of course, as I can, I will come back with reviews next year to tell you which ones are worth your time and money, whether you pre-order them or get them from your library. All that being said, let's get started. Now, starting in January with Death of an Author by Nnedi Okorafor, who is a very well-known author, famous for writing African speculative fiction. In this one, it follows an author who typically writes a lot of literary work. She is down on her luck. She, at the beginning of the story, just loses her job. Her latest novel has just been rejected by a publisher, and so she decides to go and write something for herself. So rather than writing something literary, she decides to write something science fiction, so involves AI and robots fighting in the aftermath of humanity. And this book actually takes off. And so this book really follows what happens after this is published, how it changes their life, and also possibly the future of humanity and the future of robotics in this imagined world. And so I'm very fascinated by it. I've read this author before and typically really like their work. And this one just sounds great. It is a story within a story, which is something that I either really love or can be challenging to read depending on how it's done, how it's executed, but absolutely one I want to check out. It's, again, an early release in the year, and I will get my hands on it and review it as soon as possible. Then we have All the Water in the World by Eiren Caffall, and this is a story that is set in a future where the caps have melted and there is flooding throughout the world. We follow Nnedi and her family as they are surviving inside the remnants of the Natural History Museum in New York, and they have a rule there that they really try not to pillage the exhibits unless they absolutely have to for survival, and really are trying to preserve it as much as possible. They go and try to grow things in Central Park and really try to make use of the land that they have. Then something happens. They have to go on the run when there is flooding, and they try to take along the history of the museum as much as possible in order to save it. This is a book I am particularly interested in because of the fact that it's very much inspired by a lot of the cultural preservation attempts that are made in certain places, whether it be due to war or, in this case, natural disasters, where individuals will go and try to save the history, the culture, the artifacts of these places. And so it's a near future story that, of course, deals with post-apocalyptic events and climate change, things that I just find really interesting to read about in science fiction. So it's a subgenre that I think will work very well for me. I'm hoping it'll have an exciting plot, and I almost wonder if it'll have certain vibes that will remind us of The Last of Us, the TV show, and of course first the video game, just because you have people living in the aftermath of the world and reusing popular places like museums in order to stay and survive. So very excited for this one. I definitely think it has favorite potential from the premise at least. Next, we have Hammajang Luck, which is a novel that follows a man named Eddie who says that he is done with crime. He has served 8 years in prison. He's just getting out and wants to put that all behind him. He blames his previous colleague Angel for all of this, for getting him into this situation. And so when Angel comes saying that they're going to do one last job and then that's it, of course he is reluctant to trust them. He's not sure if he should go along with this, but of course I imagine he's going to get tempted into this one last job situation. I will admit, in terms of premise, this one is a little bit tropey for me, and I'm less clear on where the science fiction elements are going to come in. This one is described as being Blade Runner meets Ocean 11, so I am excited for a heist job, but I'm looking for it to do something a little bit innovative. It is one that is very easily searchable when you're looking for new releases coming out next year, and so I think there's going to be a lot of marketing buzz around it. It's just a matter of if it lives up to the hype, but again, I always have to try it for myself, so I'll let you know once I've read it if it brings the sci-fi angle that I'm looking for. Now, jumping ahead to March, we have Space Brooms by A.G. Rodriguez, and this is what I'm really excited for. It follows a man named Johnny who is a space custodian. He is a space janitor, and while everyone else is enjoying the highlights of future technology and the world that he gets to live in, he is the one that cleans up the poop at the end of the day. One day, inside of the alien poop, he discovers this data chit, and on there is something that changes everything. He is then on the run trying to survive, and his story and life is forever changed. It sounds like a really fun, rompy premise. I don't know how seriously the book is going to take itself, but given the fact that there is the word poop in the premise, I'm guessing it's going to be a little bit more jokey. It may not be entirely to my taste as someone who prefers more dark and hard science fiction, but does it sound like a really fun palate cleanser, a great adventure, just a good escapist time? Absolutely, I will definitely check it out. It sounds hilarious, and I need to read it for myself because space janitors sound fantastic. Next up, we have The Martian Contingency by Mary Robinette Kowal. This is the fourth and likely final book in the Lady Astronaut series. In this one is set at the beginning in a historical past where there is this meteorite strike that changes the course of our space program. In order to expedite the program, we allow women to enter the program a lot earlier, and so we follow some of the astronauts, Alma, and then also her colleagues that are the first ladies to go into space. In this fourth one, we are following the characters as they are going onto Mars and establishing a colony there. There's always a mystery element to these books, so while they're science fiction, there's always something more going on. And so it sounds like there is some kind of sabotage or possibly something that they are trying to cover up that happened on Mars. And so of course, Alma, our main character, is trying to piece that together and figure out what is happening in order to save the colony. I have really enjoyed these books. They're very character heavy, and while they do lean into factual science about astronaut life, again, it is really more about the characters, their relationships. This book, if it's like the last ones, will also focus a lot on social commentary, while we'll have the focal point of, again, women in a very male-centric workplace, and also of course the challenges for those that are of different backgrounds and different nationalities and so forth. And so that is all brought together in this book that is very conversational about this imagined alternate history here. And so this is one where I very much enjoyed the last three books, and I've been dying for this one. Technically this release date has moved around a couple years, but at the time of recording this, there is now cover art, which was not there before. So I actually think that this release date might stick. And again, highly anticipating this one. I am definitely going to pre-order it myself because I love the audiobook narration done by the author. Highly recommend, but you do want to start back in the beginning because you get so much more out of the story if you go back to the start. Next, still in March, we have When the Moon Hits Your Eye by John Scalzi, which is a story by a very iconic popular author. In this one, it's set in, I believe, a near future where the moon has been replaced by an orb of cheese. And then we follow it through the full lunar cycle from different perspectives. So we have a preacher, a politician, a billionaire, a school child, and a scientist, and different perspectives that are going to be weighing in on how their life has been changed through this strange event. I will be honest, in terms of premise, this sounds absolutely silly, and I've really enjoyed this author's backlist books, particularly their older titles, things like The Old Man's War. Their more recent titles have leaned a little too heavily on the side of silly for me, so I am going into this one cautious. So while I'm very much anticipating and looking forward to reading it, I'm hoping, despite that ridiculous premise, it will have some depth in terms of the characters and really bring something a little bit more meaty than some of his books that he wrote that were kind of meant to be very escapist over the last few years. So anticipating this one, I'm hoping it's not quite as goofy as it sounds, but I need to be prepared for that. I know while it may not be a 5-star read for me, depending on how silly it goes, I know a lot of you are also looking forward to this one, so I did want to include it on my list. And last for March, we have The Third Rule of Time Travel by Philip Fracassi, and this is a book that follows a scientist who builds a machine that allows the human consciousness to be moved back in time. The only hitch is that you can't actually affect or change the timeline, you can only simply observe it. That is all I know, and I'm very much interested on it for a few reasons. One reason is that I've read this author before and typically really enjoy their work. They typically write more horror, so it is possible that while this one is positioned as a science fiction story, there definitely could be some horror, darker elements woven in there, which I do not mind, but that's something to keep in mind if you're a little bit more squeamish there. I can't confirm that until I read it, of course. And also, I love time travel in stories. I love the concept of going back, even if you can't affect things, just what the process of observing could potentially do, or what that would be like to watch something and not be able to change it. I think that there's a lot of different, really interesting angles this author can explore in this book, and I'm really looking forward to seeing more for myself where this one is going to go. I cannot wait to read it, and of course we'll report back. Now moving on to April is Scales by Christopher Hinz. This is one that follows a soldier whose first mission goes wonderfully until he accidentally eats one of his fellow soldiers. You find out within the story that the corporation that helped him to get into this military life has infused his DNA with reptiles, and so he becomes a super soldier but also has cannibalistic urges. In order to make this whole thing successful, the corporation ends up hiring a therapist to work with him and try to have him deal with these urges and come to a livable existence. I gotta be honest, this premise sounds bananas. I am partially interested in this one because I love books that involve dinosaurs. I'm always kind of interested in crazy banana pants concepts and premises. This one I believe is an Angry Robot title, and they tend to just write, or publish rather, really silly books sometimes, but sometimes they can be amazing. So I'm gonna go into this book with the right expectations. I think it's gonna be a little bit more silly, maybe. I think it's gonna be hard to write a story like this and have the tone feel serious, but regardless, I definitely wanna try it. I'm so curious, and again, I think that there's just something fun and out there and different, which is often what I'm looking for when it comes to science fiction. So I will be honest, this is probably the biggest wildcard pick of this video, but do I want to try it for myself and see a cannibalistic reptile man? Absolutely. Then we have Notes of a Regicide by Isaac Fellman, and this is a story that follows a young person who escapes his abusive family and is brought in by these other individuals who raise them as their own son. And so we find out that the couple that is bringing them in have their own scarred past, and there's just a lot of deep, dark secrets that they're keeping and really hiding all the horrible things that have happened. Eventually, their child goes and really looks it up. They find this journal and starts to really reveal the dark history that they came from. It's a story that deals with coming of age and found family. It has these lovers that are torn apart by the differences. I really don't know a lot about it. I actually don't even know where the science fiction elements come in, but it is labeled as so I do trust the marketing labels to be correct. And so it's one I very much want to check out for myself. I'm a huge fan of a found family story. I think it's really important to have the messaging that we can always find family where we seek it out to be, and I am very much interested in this one. Again, I just don't have enough information to tell you more, which is always the challenge doing these type of videos. Then jumping far ahead to October, we have The Last Contract of Isako by Fonda Lee. This, of course, is the author who wrote the Jade City series that I really have come to love when it comes to fantasy, and so I'm excited for her to do some more science fiction. So this one is supposed to be heavily inspired by a samurai type movie. It is set in the late stages of capitalism, and we follow a contractor who is on this isolated colony planet where there is espionage and sword fighting. This is very much a case where I'm interested in this book because of the author. I found them to be someone who writes a really tight plot with excellent character work, and I'm looking forward to how they'll infuse some of the Asian cultural elements that they did in Jade City into this one, and seeing the little bits of samurai inspiration because I understand the author loves those type of movies and wanted to write something in space, a space opera that was going to give notes or a similar feeling at least to those type of films. Very much excited for this one. Again, it's a ways out and I don't think it even has a cover, but I'm very much excited for it. As soon as I can get my hands on it, you bet I'm going to be reading it. And finally, in late 2025, we have The Shadows Upon Time by Christopher Ruocchio, which is the 7th and final book in the Sun Eater series. This is a long-running series that follows a man who supposedly caused the devastation of a whole society and has this nefarious past. I've done a series review as well as a standalone review of the 6th book, so I will try to have them linked down below if I remember. And it's a series that I'm very much anticipating. I don't even have a synopsis for the final book, and even if I did, I'm sure it would be spoilery for those of you that have not started the series yet. But needless to say, if you have read into the series, I think that the later books just get better and better, and I'm very much anticipating seeing this series through and seeing how it all comes together. I think that the author has, of course, challenges in the type of narrative that he wrote, but I very much trust that I think he can do it correctly. I think it can be done right, and I'm hoping to get my hands on this one as soon as possible because I really do want to see how the series all comes together. The books are big, it's a long-running series, and it'll be so good to finally see it all wrapped up and see that satisfying ending, which I'm really anticipating is going to be coming. So that is it for this video here. I'd love to know the books I talked about. Which ones are you planning on checking out for yourself? And I'd also love to hear what is your most anticipated science fiction book. Keep in mind that if I haven't talked about it here, it probably means that it wasn't easily accessible on the internet as I was preparing for this video, because if you look at the timestamp, I filmed and posted this video very early in 2024. So if you haven't yet, remember to check out my most anticipated horror video, which should be available by now. And as well, if you want to stick around and subscribe, I will be reviewing as many of these titles as possible once I get my hands on them. So subscribe, hit that little thumbs up button, hit that little notification bell, and I'd love to hear from you in the comments, even if it's just an emoji like a spaceship letting me know you're here. Thanks so much for watching. Talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.